Hello, it's Chloe Bruce. I'm a former gas journalist and academic specialising in the politics of Russian natural gas and Russian politics. I've been discussing in my videos many aspects of the UK society and specifically the housing crisis and how the sounds of the housing crisis are muffled by immigration debates. This is a clear tactic to divert attention away from how bad the homelessness situation in London is. I've discussed how I was homeless for 11 months in a B&B for the homeless, which was effectively a house share rather than a B&B with families cramped into one room. I was a single person there and had a tiny attic room. And I've been discussing this in the context of my diagnosis of schizophrenia some while back, years and years ago, when I was in my late 20s, in the early new millennium, and how this has bred a kind of Munchausen media, Munchausen ministry in Britain, where all they want to do is either blame immigrants or they want to blame the mentally ill for sapping money from the state because their needs are so great, when in fact they've been libelling the mentally ill quite clearly and at the government level, saying that people like me are so incapable, we don't even know how to use a lavatory. And I've discussed this disgusting racist approach to mental health and health in general in previous videos. From the title of this video, you'll see I'm saying that how the southeast, London here, where I am, turned into the south beast because there's such property mania that I'm even getting a knock on the door to try and panic me into giving away all my benefits. I'm on long-term sick leave. They're just going around hounding the vulnerable and then trying to say it's actually too expensive to keep the ill. With sinister projects like the barge that was meant to export immigrants, meant to home immigrants, but how would you stop it setting sail? It is extremely unpleasant. And I've discussed this barge and the strikes, like the medical strikes, in previous videos. I discussed yesterday a little bit of the civil unrest in Britain and how, for me, it's inevitable if you have a regime this defunct and unfair. And I've said that if you have a far-right activist, maybe who's as such a hate criminal, they're going to want the same level of benefit as a kind of other hate criminal. And if the government, a hateful government, hurling accusations about each other's racism, aren't held to account, they're going to become extremely bitter about the haves and have-nots in Britain. Why would that racist be in a senior official position, or in the council, let's say, when they're not? And I've had racist comments from the council and anything to get my flat because they've got such property hysteria. A flat like this is going to make them their first million. It's a disgusting situation. I want to say very briefly before I go on about this current situation, a little word on the government here. The problem is this with these far-right activists. I've said it's extremely unpalatable, and how I personally, and I think everyone will share my view, if there's a fight against fascism, we'll have to fight them. And I don't see any benefit in a racist or a fascist. But I do think that they have to understand the whole regime rather than just blaming a few individuals. And the problem is some of the medias have made out that being an immigrant is a sort of it's like winning the lottery. Even if they're describing quite shabby conditions, they make out they've got it all, and this is simply untrue. They're no better off than anyone else. They live in horrific conditions, as we understand, in these asylum hotels, and they have children also, and they're separating off the men from the women and children. The barge was actually just for men who had come in, as I understand, from France over the Channel. We're probably living better as a Brit, but they're trying to actually oust British people also. It's a disgrace. They're simply not winning the lottery just by being an immigrant here, but there are some British people who may be sort of making out that they're getting it all, and there may be assumption, for whatever reason, maybe from their appearance or from their accents, that they are themselves immigrants, getting all this sort of attention as an immigrant, whereas in fact it's probably a type of spoilt Brit stoking discontent. We've had, of course, news today of Keir Starmer's response, or apparent response, to Elon Musk, saying that civil war is inevitable, and this is a little bit what I'm describing here. And some of the context of this, because Elon Musk, why would anyone have an issue with Elon Musk? But apparently he's cancelled too, just because he wouldn't share his satellites or something of that nature with Ukraine to help them battle Russia. They want a war or something between the US and Russia. Or is that sort of, is he helping them? It might just be there's a limit to what he can do, maybe with his technologies. They don't seem to like the guy either. They don't like me, they don't like Elon Musk, they don't like, as far as I can tell, nothing but criticism of anyone with an outlook that's halfway broad-minded. They don't like broad-minded people at all. Anyway, so that's my introduction. I hope it wasn't too long-winded. I'm just going to read something quite brief about the context of what's going on. It's been in the news a lot, these issues, but I'm going to just recap what's been going on in London. So when I was homeless, I wrote to various bodies. This was in 2017 when I was in the homelessness B&B, but specifically addressed the former Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, I hope I'm remembering her name correctly, about the housing crisis. Not because I had only just noticed, but because it had been ignored for so many years, for me, even as a working professional, and under so many governments, that action was needed. As a member of UK society and a UK passport holder, I said in no uncertain terms that if appropriately compassionate responses were not issued, and this was in letters to the government and various officials and other bodies in 2017, if this compassionate response was not issued, then I would put Amber Rudd, and I said this on the record with my name, not any secrecy, in a military court. And I meant every word of it. I meant every word of it. If you know the baby screaming in the B&B for the homeless and how that felt, that she didn't even care about these babies coming to harm, you will know exactly how I feel. And I also informed the world community about this, including the White House. And I do not say civil war was inevitable if they had addressed this issue. But it has been a feature of my existence ever since I wrote this letter. Indeed, I've had physical fights on several occasions, and this is a first for me. I'll say this. I've described how I had to defend myself against police officers in my flat when they hauled me off semi-naked down the streets to a hospital. And they're still sending ambulance drivers over to try and get me to hospital, and they're now attacking ambulance drivers in their cab because they don't want to go into hospital. They're not necessarily even mentally ill. I don't know if I said in the beginning, yes, I said how I was diagnosed with schizophrenia and later developed epilepsy. And luckily my seizures are under control now, and I no longer need to take anti-epileptics, but I'm forced to take antipsychotics. They just label people violent, and that's it. They can just use slander to get what they want. These fights were started by the other side, just because they were in the habit of hurting women and getting away with hurting women. And these are both men and misogynistic women. I would just stand there and they would come up and address me and say, why are you here, why are you here? And it was just, and COVID also, leering at you and coming up, trying to buy food in a shop and they come up and grab it out of your hand. I haven't used my fists in particular. I've worn them off like that, back off, and that usually works. But I've used my legs. I've kicked people. I've kicked a man in the ribs who's trying to block me in a revolving door, and I've kicked the groins and neck of police officers, a female police officer and a male police officer, and she ducked like this, but otherwise it would have been her throat, my foot. I'm not saying I wanted it, but at the end of the day, I'm just sitting there and then they come and attack me. As I say, it's a habit they're into. They didn't actually ever address the civil rights of women. And I can say that from my point of view, that I do know. What do they expect after years and years of oppressing women and society through cancelling the housing welfare state and welfare state for underpaying people for thinking a debate on housing, heating or eating is an adequate debate. They think that's a debate that should be had. It's a crisis if people can't eat. And most people in Britain do manage without heating because it's a mild climate. And of course they'll eat, but some people are extremely, they have to have the heating on for medical reasons. It's not a debate to have in a light-hearted manner. Can you please be a bit more serious? Yes, and yes, they're used to attacking working women or women who might have children or both. No sooner have you met a nice doctor, I have said, to discuss all these concerns with, and regime concerns. And I've discussed this in other videos, these sort of male fascists by default who just don't care. And then they start turning down the volume when it's something real like regime collapse. By those with non-democratic ideals who are trying to explain that this is going to be a disaster. As a regime expert myself, I know it's a disaster to have an increasingly flawed democracy. And they prefer instead, these men, to discuss the spurious issue of mental health, specifically what you eat as a woman and how well you do your housework. They don't care, as they have all the complacency of the man who benefited from this situation in Britain, from the unfairness, got all the senior positions. I've discussed this before, it's a hard fact. I read an MI6 document that said women weren't getting the pay because they weren't getting the promotion. They sit there with all the complacency of this man, this type of UK man, who has never understood their own fists. How do you think I feel? I can't help the fact that I'm physically weaker. I can't do a manual job in the way some men can. Because it is the woman, at the end of the day, fighting off the men. They have to fight off the men because if there is a war, the woman is the one attacked. They are the one who is attacked as a human shield, take the children, but they want money in the same vein. I have had to endure taxpayer paid for lectures from these doctors of psychiatry, GPs, you name it, about what to eat, how to eat meat properly. Don't eat lean meat. When I can actually say, it's in my notes, that I've been a lifelong vegetarian. All they ever see is a woman is their figure and how to control that woman. They have no right to try and control anyone through discussing their weight. And it's hardly helping. We have a terrible, horrific problem with eating disorders or their hygiene in the home. And we are now suffering eating disorders on a grand scale. Young women and girls and boys are starving themselves because, this is quite clear in the psychological literature, they starve themselves often because they have to regain control over their own destiny, their own figure. And I have said I'm no exception to this. I'm okay now, but I lost a third of my body weight after this lean meat discussion, all this disapproval. They have no right to try and control my figure. And it's hardly helping. If it worked, that's one thing. It doesn't work, and it clearly doesn't work. All they're doing is hungering for their meat in some ghastly manner. It is to prevent these food fascists from becoming too important in your life that you actually have to start controlling your own food. Luckily, I had never been voluntarily underweight. I was starved in hospital once and became underweight when in psychiatric hospital. But in my youth, I had a touch of bulimia nervosa, as it's called that still. And luckily, that's yes. I found it particularly difficult. If I'd eaten a large salty meal, I'd feel extremely ill and make myself sick. But I also wanted to get thinner. Luckily, this has cleared up completely many years ago. Decades have gone since I've had this problem. And I've now dispelled any situation of body dysmorphia. I was bullied in my youth and childhood about my legs by a family member who sort of said they were ghastly misshapen. Well, they didn't say that, they said Betty Boop legs, and sort of cackled about my legs. Until I had this, I was okay about them, I didn't that bad, I just couldn't work out how to make them slim. Until a ballet teacher told me they were hyperextended legs, which is, she says, good for dance. And this has helped my self-esteem and worries about my leg shape. And I had horrific shakes, which I was putting down to the tablets, and had horrible time of it, and putting down to some brain damage through epilepsy. I was just extremely upset. But it turns out that now I do my hamstring exercises, I can control the shakes, because I have a type of leg where the knee jars back, and you have to actually keep the hamstring nice and strong to eliminate this. That is my story. I've talked about, in other videos, the erosion of democracy here in London through the pressure on journalists like me, and the axing of legal aid. And that doesn't, they say on the internet, this hasn't been axed. I'm sorry, you try and find a lawyer. And that doesn't cause discontent or something, to axe a lawyer, to axe a journalist. The government is still saying immigration is the hot issue and the meaningful issue for people here in Britain, to disguise, as I've discussed in many videos, their poor, appalling housing policies. And don't forget that some of them have made their wealth on the back of buying their council home. Boris Johnson, who I call S'mores Man, S''O''M''O''R''E''S, the marshmallow dish, who was the comeback kid at some points, the Milky Way kid, pro-AI in terms of what he said later in the latter part of his career as a PM, until he was finally ousted. He was the comeback kid, described as the comeback kid until he was finally ousted, has said, if the news is to be believed, and I do believe this because of my own experiences, that he's been in a kangaroo court. And I called him Joey Johnson in a previous video, not because, like not because he was a kangaroo living in the pocket of mum and dad. They've talked about the bank of mum and dad being part of the UK economy, but because the Partygate scandal had all these sandwiches and brews conjured up from caterers, and it's a sort of delivery food situation in COVID. The Deliveroo company that delivers food to people. A lot was made of the catering part of this Partygate, the do he had. The media keeps talking of cancelling people, as though it's sort of in some kind of mirth or something, as though woke themselves. And this sort of wokeness, talking about cancelling people, hurling accusations to and fro, is actually a type of censor. I've said how they use social services, unqualified individuals lording over others, saying they're perfect when I happen to know they're not, coming from a family of psychiatrists and social workers, one child psychiatrist and one social worker, see my other videos. They wield government emails and terrorise the people with these social services. Wherever you go, it's either the Citizens Advice Bureau for rubbish advice from equally unqualified people or the same people, and all social services. And this was actually, it was a protest against social services that ignited, apparently, the first protest. It wasn't seen as a far-right protest then, but you try and decoupling the first protest from the further protests. I'm not surprised. They are intolerable as individuals. The media reports on government personalities, and or either on government, the media is using either government personalities as the news and their statements, or the heating or eating debate. And they're mentioning people who are hard up, the heating or eating brigade. But what about piddle in the middle? I don't know about other countries, but most supermarkets now have all staff in cameras, body cams. Lucky then that we can now buy online food. Ha ha ha, let's now spy on their eating habits officially. Property lust. Didn't have to turn London, the southeast, into the southeast with thugs turning up to claim your benefits and your housing benefit in the flat for themselves, because of all this hysteria about how much the property costs and how little rent, how much rents are and how much you can earn out of a property as a sure thing, as soon as they deem you vulnerable. But it's the government who will have to fight their own property monster and calm down their rhetoric about the flaws of other regimes. I'd actually felt upset for Keir Starmer when during the 2024 election, this year's election campaign, they criticised him for taking off Friday evenings for religious reasons. But he might be a kind of Keir Royale after all, completely oblivious to how at least this woman feels. Does the Labour government really want to provoke people into proving there's a civil war? Do they want to continue burying their heads in the sands while enjoying property riches? You seem very confident that we can be subjugated. You seem very confident that the next Dr. Singh will carefully handle this angry woman. You feel very confident that you control society because you've got your own way so far. I beg to differ. Grow up and get real.